You announced the goal. You posted the plan. You shared the vision. You let other people look into a future you had not earned yet. And for a moment, it felt powerful. The comments came in. The approval came in. The attention came in. And your brain accepted that attention as progress. That is the part you keep refusing to face. You did not lose momentum by accident. You spent it in public. The truth is, the moment you turned your work into a performance, it began to weaken. You felt seen before you became strong. You felt supported before you became disciplined. You felt recognized before you produced anything real. And once the reward arrived early, your system relaxed. The urgency faded. The edge disappeared. The standard dropped. That felt like support. It was a release valve. This is why so many plans die young. Not because the goal was wrong. Not because the dream was too large. Because the mouth moved before the hands did. Because the image came before the discipline. Because you wanted witnesses before you wanted results. The most powerful thing you can do right now is say nothing. Build in silence. Focus on yourself. Guard your ambition like fire in a storm. Let nobody warm their hands over it until it has become something undeniable. This audiobook is about the discipline of silence and what becomes possible when you stop performing your growth and start doing the work. Chapter 1. The Performance Trap. You can feel it when the room goes quiet and the screen goes dark. That brief second when there is no one to impress, no one to update, and no one to react. That is the moment most people run from. Not because silence is empty, but because silence removes the costume. It takes away the audience and reveals the truth. Are you actually building something, or have you been rehearsing the image of a person who builds? That question cuts because it goes beyond productivity. It reaches into identity. It forces you to confront how much of your effort has been spent on appearing serious instead of becoming serious. The truth is, much modern ambition is not ambition at all. It is presentation. It is branding. It is signaling. It is the careful arrangement of words, photos, routines, and declarations designed to make your life look focused, even when your inner life is scattered and weak. This is where most people stop. They stop at the image because it offers faster rewards than the work. You live in a world that has made performance easy and building difficult. The screen is always ready. The camera is always ready. The feed is always ready to reward anything that looks like effort. You can post the early morning. You can post the books. You can post the notes. You can post the gym mirror, the clean desk, the highlighted page, the promise, the intention, the bold statement about what is coming next. And because it looks disciplined, because it resembles commitment, your brain starts to blur the line between visible effort and actual progress. That blur is dangerous, because real progress is usually invisible for a long time. It is repetitive. It is quiet. It is boring to watch. It rarely flatters you in the moment. Real progress does not always look strong while it is happening. Sometimes it looks clumsy. Sometimes it looks small. Sometimes it looks like another hour alone doing something nobody cares about yet. But performance looks impressive immediately. Performance gives instant social proof. Performance lets you borrow the appearance of a result before the result exists. And your brain loves that trade, even when your future pays the bill. The truth is, the mind responds to social reward with shocking obedience. A little recognition can feel like accomplishment. A little praise can feel like completion. A little attention can feel like arrival. That is why someone can spend more time curating the image of discipline than practicing it. The applause loop starts small. You share something. You receive approval. You feel validated. Then you repeat the behavior that brought the validation. Before long, you are not asking what builds your life. You are asking what gets noticed. That shift is almost invisible when it begins. That is what makes it so destructive. You tell yourself you are documenting. You tell yourself you are holding yourself accountable. You tell yourself that sharing the process keeps you consistent. Sometimes that is true for limited things, but most of the time it is something else. Most of the time you are feeding an identity that lives outside you. You are trying to maintain the impression of growth, and the maintenance itself becomes the project. You start selecting goals that look admirable rather than those that demand change. You start speaking in polished terms about discipline while quietly avoiding the ugly part of discipline, repetition without applause. You start craving the feeling of being perceived as driven. That feeling becomes a substitute for the discomfort of becoming skilled. And this is where most people stop. They stop at the performance because performance is clean, building is messy, performance is social, building is private, performance gives feedback now, building gives proof later, performance lets you stay liked. Building risks misunderstanding, boredom, and periods where nothing outward seems to move, but your life is not shaped by what looks impressive for a week. It is shaped by what you can sustain when nothing about it is entertaining. Look closely at how this trap operates. A person decides to get serious. Instead of sitting down and entering the difficult private phase, that person speaks first. First posts, first announces, first creates a visible identity around the work. Now the work carries new weight. It is no longer just effort, it is theater. It has an audience. It has expectations. It has image management built in. So instead of asking, "What must I do today?" the person begins asking, "How will this look? How will this sound? What will people think? How can I maintain the appearance of momentum?" The center of gravity shifts outward. That is the loss. Because once your center lives outside you, your discipline becomes fragile. Every response matters too much. Every silence from others feels like doubt. Every small setback feels harder, because it threatens not only the goal, but the image you projected. Now you are defending a public version of yourself while trying to build a private reality beneath it. That split drains force. The strongest people are usually not the loudest about what they are doing. They are not spending their best energy on explanation. They are not advertising every attempt. They understand something most people do not want to hear. Attention is expensive. Visibility is expensive. Exposure is expensive. If your foundation is still wet, the last thing you need is a crowd stepping on it. You do not need more witnesses. You need more substance. You do not need people to know what you intend. You need your actions to know. You do not need to sound committed. You need to become difficult to distract. That is the turning point. The moment you realize you have been performing more than building. The moment you see how often your efforts have been shaped by appearances. The moment you understand that looking focused and being focused are not the same thing. That recognition is uncomfortable because it removes excuses. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it. You begin to notice how often social media invites you away from depth and into display. You begin to feel the weakness in publicly rehearsed ambition. You begin to sense that some of your goals died not from lack of ability, but from too much exposure too early. And then a harder truth arrives. It was never only about the audience. It was about the way your own mind responded to being seen, because the brain does not always wait for reality. Sometimes it accepts the symbol. Sometimes it accepts the signal. Sometimes it takes the announcement as a partial victory and starts closing the emotional circuit long before the work is done. That is when silence becomes more than restraint. It becomes a form of protection. Chapter 2. The Neuroscience of Announced Goals. You already know the pattern even if you never had words for it. The moment you tell someone what you are about to do, something inside you softens. Not always, not fully, but enough to matter. A little urgency leaks out. A little private fire turns public and loses heat. Later, when the work demands effort, you feel strangely empty. You wonder why the drive vanished. You tell yourself you need more motivation, But motivation was not the main problem. Exposure was. The truth is, the brain is deeply responsive to social acknowledgement. It does not only care about what is real, it cares about what feels socially real. When you declare a goal and another person reacts with admiration, approval, encouragement, or respect, your system receives a reward. That reward is not imaginary. It changes state. It gives you a felt sense that something meaningful has already happened. In a small but powerful way, the identity you wanted to earn is suddenly being handed to you in advance, and that changes behavior. There has been research for years pointing to this effect. Publicly stating an intention can reduce the drive to complete it, because the social recognition creates a sense of completion before completion exists. The mind likes closure. It likes identity confirmation. If other people already respond to you as if you are becoming disciplined, becoming serious, becoming accomplished, then the internal pressure to prove it through action begins to ease. The announced goal gives you some of the emotional payoff of the finished goal. That is a terrible bargain, because the reward is real enough to weaken you, but not real enough to build anything. This is where most people stop. They stop at the point of social acknowledgement and never realize that their own nervous system helped shut the engine down. Listen carefully to what happens. You say you are writing a book. Someone says that is impressive. You say you are launching something. Someone says that is exciting. You say you are getting serious about your body, your money, your habits, your discipline. People respond as if the new version of you has already begun to exist. Your mind absorbs the identity's status before it absorbs the labor required to make it real. Now the work has to compete with a counterfeit reward. This is why a goal often feels strongest before it is spoken. In private it is alive, concentrated, and unresolved. It has tension, it has weight. It has a kind of sacred incompleteness that pulls you toward action. But once it is spoken too early, the pressure changes form. What was once pure internal tension becomes a shared social idea. It becomes lighter, more diffuse, less demanding. Instead of driving behavior, it begins to drift into language. That is why private intentions so often produce stronger execution. Privacy keeps the circuit open. It keeps the identity unconfirmed. It keeps the mind hungry. There is no applause to relax into. No public image to borrow. No shortcut through approval. The only way to close the gap is through action. That creates a cleaner relationship between desire and work. You want the result. You work for the result. Nothing interrupts that line. The truth is, silence is not superstition. It is strategy. It preserves tension. It preserves necessity. It preserves the honest distance between who you are and who you are trying to become. That distance matters because it creates movement. If you shorten it with talk, you often reduce the force that would have carried you through effort. Think of how many times you felt powerful while speaking and powerless while doing. That is not random. Speech can simulate progress. Description can create emotional release. The mind often confuses verbal clarity with lived commitment. You can explain your plan in beautiful detail and still remain unchanged. In fact, the more fluent you become in the language of ambition, the easier it becomes to mistake language for labor. You can sound sharp and still be stagnant. You can sound committed and still be weak. You can sound ready and still do nothing. This is where most people stop, because talking feels productive. It organizes thought. It creates momentum in conversation. It earns respect. But execution demands something conversation does not. It demands that your identity remain unsupported long enough for discipline to carry it. It demands that you endure uncertainty without public comfort. It demands that you keep working while no one around you affirms who you are becoming. That is why keeping your next move silent is such a powerful habit. Silence denies you the emotional shortcut. It removes the option of feeding on reaction. It forces the work to be the only proof available, and once work becomes the only proof available, your standards change. You stop trying to sound serious. You start trying to become effective. You stop reaching for encouragement at the starting line. You start building strength that does not need encouragement to continue. Silence sharpens responsibility. If nobody knows, then there is no external script to maintain, no image to perform, no easy praise to enjoy. There is only the promise you made to yourself and the evidence you produce in private. That is a clean arrangement, hard but clean. And hard is often exactly what preserves the thing you want. Because easy recognition creates soft commitment. Private effort creates hard commitment. Easy recognition tells your nervous system that part of the social reward has already arrived. Private effort tells your nervous system that nothing has arrived and nothing will arrive unless you earn it. That is the state you want, not comfort, not visibility, hunger. The most disciplined people often move like this without announcing the principle. They disappear into work. They let silence hold the pressure. They do not talk themselves empty. They do not spill intention in every direction. They let the mind keep its sense of unfinished business, and that unfinished business becomes a source of power. The truth is, you do not need more motivation. You need fewer leaks. You do not need more supportive reactions. You need more private standards. You do not need to say the next thing. You need to protect it. Once you understand this, you stop treating silence like restraint and start treating it like fuel conservation. You begin to see every unnecessary explanation, every early announcement, every public declaration as a small theft from future execution. You realize that some goals fail not because they were impossible, but because they were spoken before they were stable. And when that truth lands, silence starts to look less like emptiness and more like armor. Chapter 3. What silence protects. The moment a goal leaves your mouth, it enters other people's hands, not literally, but mentally, emotionally, socially. Now it can be touched, questioned, doubted, praised, compared, misunderstood, and pulled into conversations that have nothing to do with the work itself. The thing that was once alive inside you becomes exposed, and exposure always changes what is exposed. That is why silence matters long before results appear. Silence protects the vulnerable phase. It protects the unfinished form of what you are building. It protects the fragile state where the idea is still becoming discipline, where intention is still hardening into action, where your confidence is still learning to stand without an audience. Most people expose their weakest points, then act surprised when outside noise disturbs the structure. The truth is, not everything should be shared while it is still forming. Some things need darkness before they can bear light. Some things need privacy before they can survive contact. Unsolicited opinions are one of the quiet killers of execution. Even positive opinions can weaken you if they arrive too early. They shift your attention from doing to managing. Suddenly you are not just working, you are also processing what others think about your work, your plan, your timeline, your chances, your methods. Some people doubt you openly. Some people smile and plant a seed of hesitation. Some people offer advice you never asked for. Some people project their limits onto your vision, and because you are human, some part of you responds. Now energy is being spent in the wrong place. This is where most people stop. They underestimate how expensive it is to defend a vision before it becomes real. Every explanation costs energy. Every defense costs energy. Every attempt to make someone else understand the shape of your future costs energy. And the cruel part is that none of that energy produces the future. It only manages other people's relationship to it. That is wasted force. That is life power being dragged sideways into conversation instead of forward into construction. Silence removes the interference before it begins. When people do not know, they cannot interrupt, they cannot weigh in. They cannot hand you doubt disguised as realism. They cannot pull your attention toward their own comfort. They cannot force you into premature clarity about something that still needs room to grow. Silence keeps your work close to the chest until it has enough substance to stand on its own. That is not secrecy born from fear. That is strategic protection. Think of your most valuable assets. You do not carelessly leave them exposed. You do not invite random hands onto them. You do not let every passing voice determine how to handle them. You protect what matters. You put distance between value and noise. Your goals deserve the same respect. Your discipline deserves the same respect. Your concentration deserves the same respect. The truth is, your attention is one of your most valuable assets. Silence protects that attention. The modern world is full of invitations to scatter. Messages, feeds, opinions, reactions, updates, arguments, commentary. It all creates a climate in which your inner world is constantly being intruded upon by something external. In that climate, silence becomes a boundary. It is a refusal to let every outside current move your internal direction. It says, this belongs to me for now. This will grow without public handling. This will be carried by work, not by discussion. That boundary creates a kind of guarded strength. It changes how you move. You stop feeling the need to explain yourself at every stage. You stop translating every impulse into language for public consumption. You stop opening the door to outside judgment before you have finished shaping what matters. And in that protected space, momentum gets a chance to build properly. Momentum is delicate in the beginning. People talk about it as if it is loud and obvious, but early momentum is often quiet. It is a small repeated action, a private rhythm, a fragile consistency that can be broken by too much talking, too much showing, too much checking, too much defending. Silence protects that rhythm. It gives repetition room to become identity without interruption, and identity built in private is always stronger than identity performed in public. Because private identity is tested by action, not by image. It survives bad moods. It survives invisible days. It survives the lack of applause. It survives confusion, slow progress, and moments when nobody would call what you are doing impressive. Public identity often cannot survive that. Public identity feeds on recognition. Private identity feeds on proof. That is why silence is armor. Not because it hides weakness, but because it prevents unnecessary damage while strength is still forming. You do not owe people updates on your becoming. You do not owe people a draft of your future. You do not owe people a window into every hard thing you are trying to build. This is where most people stop, because silence feels uncomfortable at first. It feels like absence. It feels like being unseen. It feels like withholding something that could earn approval. But that discomfort is part of the training. If you cannot keep something private, you may not be strong enough yet to build it deeply. If your ambition constantly needs witnesses, then part of your ambition is still aimed at attention rather than mastery. Silence corrects that aim. It turns energy inward again. It keeps the vision from being negotiated too early. It keeps the work from becoming a conversation piece. It keeps your mind from spending itself on side battles that produce nothing. It teaches you to protect the inner conditions required for deep effort. And once you start protecting those inner conditions, another truth begins to rise. The more you turn your attention inward, the less you feel guilty for doing so. The more you understand that focusing on yourself is not neglect of the world, it is preparation to meet it with something real. Chapter 4. Turning inward. There comes a point when you realize that constant outward attention is not generosity, it is dispersal. It feels noble because it keeps you available, responsive, engaged, and visible. But often it is just another way of avoiding the harder task. sitting with yourself long enough to become stronger, clearer, and more ordered from the inside out. A lot of people have been taught to feel guilty for focusing on themselves. They have been taught to confuse inward attention with vanity, selfishness, distance, or coldness. So they stay externally available while internally underdeveloped. They pour themselves into everyone and everything, while their own discipline remains weak. Their minds remain noisy, and their lives remain directionless. Then they wonder why they have so little of value to offer. The truth is, self-focus is not the enemy of contribution. It is the foundation of it. You cannot give clarity from confusion. You cannot give strength from weakness. You cannot give order from inner disorder. What you bring into every relationship, every room, every conversation, every decision is the self you have built in private. If that self is scattered, needy, reactive, approval-hungry, and undisciplined, then no amount of outward kindness can fully cover what is unstable beneath. But if that self is grounded, quiet, focused, emotionally controlled, and honest, then even your silence carries weight. This is where most people stop. They stop at appearing generous without doing the internal work that makes generosity clean. Turning inward means taking responsibility for the instrument through which every action passes: your mind, your habits, your standards, your impulses, your reactions, your attention, your capacity to sit still, your ability to choose long-term value over short-term relief. That work is not selfish. It is maintenance of the source. It is refinement of the thing that touches every part of your life. The confusion comes from failing to separate selfishness from self-mastery. Selfishness takes from others to feed itself. Self-mastery disciplines the self so that it no longer becomes a burden to others. Selfishness demands attention. Self-mastery reduces the need for it. Selfishness centers desire. Self-mastery governs desire. These are not the same path. They do not even move in the same direction. The person who constantly abandons their inner life to remain publicly pleasant often ends up resentful, exhausted, and shallow. The person who turns inward to strengthen character, discipline speech, order thought, and gain control over emotion becomes more useful, not less. That person is harder to provoke, harder to distract, harder to manipulate, more capable of contributing without constantly draining. The truth is, your inward life determines the quality of your outward life. That is why serious people often protect time alone with such discipline. They understand that inward attention is where standards are reset. It is where impulses are examined. It is where truth becomes harder to avoid. When you are alone without performance, you meet your actual condition. You see what still controls you. You see where you lie to yourself. You see where you are soft. That meeting is uncomfortable, but it is the beginning of power. Because whatever you are unwilling to face within yourself will eventually rule you in public. If you do not control your need for validation, it will shape your choices. If you do not control your fear of judgment, it will silence necessary action. If you do not control your emotional volatility, it will weaken every area of your life. Turning inward is not retreat from reality. It is confrontation with reality at its source. It is the decision to stop outsourcing your state to others and to start governing it yourself. That governance produces something rare in the current world: internal focus. The ability to keep your own attention steady instead of letting it be dragged everywhere by stimuli, comparisons and noise. And internal focus changes everything. It changes how you work because you stop constantly measuring yourself through other people's eyes. It changes how you speak because you stop trying to prove who you are in every room. It changes how you choose because you stop asking what looks good and start asking what builds strength. This is where most people stop because inward focus has no audience. Nobody claps when you become more honest with yourself. Nobody celebrates when you decide to cut noise, train your mind, discipline your speech, and sit with uncomfortable truths until they reshape you. But those are the exact acts that make later contribution clean and powerful. Look at the people who actually produce something meaningful in the world, not those who market meaning, but those who create it. Their work almost always comes from periods of inward concentration. They withdraw from noise, they reduce exposure, they get serious about their own mind, they build a private standard. Then what they produce carries force because it came from depth, not performance. You cannot fake depth for long. Sooner or later the surface reveals itself. That is why focusing on yourself is not indulgence when done correctly. It is responsibility. It is the refusal to remain internally weak while expecting life to yield strong outcomes. It is the choice to make your own mind a place of order before asking the world to respond differently to you. And once you start seeing self-focus this way, another problem becomes impossible to ignore. Not only has too much attention been going outward, too much energy has been spent chasing signs that you are approved, admired, accepted, or understood. That chase has its own cost, and the cost is higher than most people ever calculate. Chapter 5. The validation drain. You can lose hours without moving. You can lose whole days while appearing busy, not because the work was unclear, but because your attention kept leaving the task and going out into the world looking for confirmation, a message, a response, a sign, a number, a reaction, some proof that what you said, posted, built, or showed landed the way you intended. That constant outward checking feels small in the moment, but across a life, it is a drain so severe that it quietly rewrites your potential downward. The truth is, approval seeking is expensive, not only emotionally, practically, cognitively, spiritually. It taxes focus, it fragments effort, it turns concentration into a series of interruptions. Every time you check for a response, part of your nervous system leaves the work and enters a state of waiting. Waiting is weak soil for deep effort. Waiting keeps the door open. Waiting says the outside world still has authority over your state. This is where most people stop. They stop at the level of craving and never calculate what the craving is costing them. Consider the pattern. You begin a task. Within minutes, your attention tilts outward. You wonder if someone replied. You wonder if the post performed well. You wonder if the message was seen. You wonder if the thing you shared is being noticed. Even if you resist checking for a while, some part of the mind is leaning that direction. Energy is already being siphoned. The task in front of you no longer has full possession of your mental field. It is sharing the room with imagined reactions. That split is costly, because depth requires continuity. Real work needs uninterrupted contact. It needs time for thought to gather weight, for ideas to connect, for effort to deepen beyond the surface layer where most attention stays. Validation seeking destroys that continuity. It breaks the spell before the work can become immersive. Then you finish the day feeling mentally tired without having done anything proportionate to that exhaustion. Why? Because attention was burned through friction. The truth is, every desire for external validation contains an implied surrender. It says my internal state is still negotiable. It says I am still waiting to see myself through your eyes. It says the work is not enough yet. I need the signal around the work. That dependence weakens self-command. It places too much emotional power in the hands of random circumstances and random people. And the world will always offer enough uncertainty to keep you hooked. Sometimes the response comes quickly and you feel a rush. Sometimes it does not come and you feel restless. Sometimes it comes in a form you did not want, and now your mind spirals around interpretation. In every case, energy leaves the central task and gets trapped in a loop. That loop does not build your body. It does not build your skill. It does not build your business. It does not build your character. It only keeps your nervous system occupied with social weather. This is where most people stop, because social weather feels important. It feels tied to identity, status, relevance, belonging. But if you are serious about discipline, you have to start seeing these loops for what they are: attacks on becoming. Attacks so common that most people no longer notice they are paying it. Imagine redirecting all that energy inward: the minutes spent checking, the mental rehearsals, the emotional spikes, the subtle hunger to be seen. Imagine taking that force and applying it to study, training, writing, building, saving, practicing, thinking, refining. The compounding effect would be enormous, not dramatic in a day, powerful across a year, because inward energy compounds, outward energy evaporates. The truth is, silence helps reclaim that energy. When you stop feeding the part of yourself that wants constant response, that part begins to weaken. At first it protests. It wants the old rhythm. It wants the quick scan, the little hit, the confirmation that you still exist in others' minds. But if you keep returning your attention to the work, you train a new standard. You teach yourself that the task deserves complete presence. You teach yourself that not every feeling of restlessness requires action. You teach yourself that attention can be held instead of surrendered. That is real power. Not the power to impress, the power to remain. You stop asking if anyone noticed. You start asking if the standard was met. You stop reaching outward for reassurance. You start building inward proof. This is where most people stop, because inward proof is slower. It has no instant reward, but it is the only kind of proof that strengthens the person producing it. External validation can momentarily elevate mood. Internal validation through disciplined action builds structure. It builds self-respect that does not wobble every time the room goes quiet. And that self-respect has a very different texture. It is calm. It is not loud. It does not need to be announced. It comes from knowing what you did when nobody was checking on you. It comes from the record you keep with yourself. It comes from effort that went unnoticed and still met the standard. That kind of confidence is not performative. It is earned density. Once you start tasting that density, approval seeking begins to feel cheap, not evil, just cheap. Too temporary, too unstable, too dependent. You begin to resent how much life has been wasted glancing outward. You begin to see the daily energy cost with clarity, and controlled anger can be useful here. Not wild anger, clean anger. The kind that says enough, enough leakage, enough interruption, enough handing over life force in exchange for crumbs. Because what you reclaim is not just time, it is integrity of attention. And when attention becomes whole again, another freedom opens. You no longer need an audience in order to take your own work seriously. You no longer need witnesses to confirm that your effort counts. You become capable of a rarer discipline, building in the quiet without needing anyone to look. Chapter 6. Building without an audience. There is a special kind of loneliness that arises when nobody knows what you are doing, and nobody comes to praise you for continuing. The room is plain, the task is repetitive, the hour is heavy. Nothing about the moment flatters you. That is where the deeper version of discipline begins, not in inspiration, not in visibility. Right there, where the work has no witnesses and still asks to be done well. Most people have never trained themselves for that condition. They have trained themselves to work when observed, to try harder when recognized, to sharpen up when feedback, measurement, or social presence is around the effort. Remove the audience, and something soft inside them collapses. The seriousness drains away, because it was partly theater. The truth is, if you cannot work in obscurity, your work does not yet belong to you. This is where most people stop. They stop when the room falls silent, and the only remaining source of momentum must come from the character. Working without an audience improves quality for a reason. Privacy removes distortion. There is no crowd to impress, no trend to satisfy, no need to package the process into something visible and attractive. You become free to be ugly in the right ways, free to make mistakes, free to repeat a weak movement until it becomes strong, free to fail without performance anxiety, free to change direction without having to explain yourself. That freedom is a serious advantage. Creative freedom expands in private because the ego has fewer surfaces to protect. When nobody is watching, you can test ideas more honestly. You can discard what is shallow without worrying about how it affects your image. You can struggle without making struggle part of your identity. You can let the work teach you instead of constantly trying to teach others what you are doing. That is how depth develops. Skill also develops differently in solitude. Solitary work offers fewer shortcuts because it offers fewer emotional rewards. You are forced into contact with the craft itself, the movement, the sentence, the repetition, the decision, the detail. Without applause, the work must justify itself through substance. That changes the builder. It increases tolerance for effort. It strengthens concentration. It builds a private standard that can survive quiet conditions, and quiet conditions are where most meaningful things are made. The truth is, the absence of witnesses can be a gift if you stop interpreting it as abandonment. Nobody watching means nobody interfering. Nobody praising means nobody distracting. Nobody measuring means you are free to discover your actual capacity, rather than the version that performs well under observation. A lot of people do not know what they are capable of because they have never spent enough uninterrupted time alone to focus on demanding work. They keep breaking contact. They keep returning to social space before the edge of their ability can reveal itself. So they live below the line of their own potential and call it realism. This is where most people stop, because the first encounter with private work can feel flat. There is no emotional amplification from the outside, no quick recognition, no visible identity boost, just effort and silence. But if you remain there long enough, something changes. The silence stops feeling empty. It starts feeling clean. The work stops feeling invisible. It starts feeling intimate. You begin to sense that the task itself is enough to hold your attention, not because it is entertaining, but because you are finally bringing your full self to it. That is settled independence. It is the point at which you no longer need witnesses to feel legitimate. It is the point where you stop confusing visibility with value. It is the point where you can sit down alone and work with the same seriousness you would bring if the whole world were watching. Maybe more, because the whole world watching often lowers quality. It introduces self-consciousness. It invites imitation. It tempts simplification. It makes you manage impression. Private work strips that away. It lets the standard rise because nothing needs to be sold in the moment. You can go deeper, stay longer, refine more carefully. Follow a difficult idea farther than public pace would allow. The truth is, privacy and excellence are often close companions, not always because privacy is inherently noble, but because excellence usually needs conditions that are difficult to maintain in public. It needs room for failure, room for ugly drafts, room for repetition, room for long stretches where the result still looks unremarkable. Public space is impatient. It wants signals. It wants updates. It wants proof now. Mastery is rarely built at that speed, so you learn to protect your hidden work. You learn to stop resenting how unseen it is. You learn that invisibility at the right stage is not obscurity. It is incubation. It is the phase in which the structure hardens. It is the phase where you stop outsourcing seriousness and start generating it from within. And what you discover there matters more than the work itself. You discover whether you can trust yourself in private, whether you can continue without comfort, whether you can endure the ordinary texture of repetition, whether you can choose standards over stimulation, whether you can build a day around what matters rather than around what gets acknowledged. That discovery changes identity at the root, because once you know you can work without an audience, you stop fearing silence in the same way. You stop needing constant relational proof that your effort has meaning. You begin to understand what older, wiser traditions have tried to teach for centuries, that public opinion is unstable, that virtue practiced for display is not virtue, that the inner life must be governed by standards stronger than praise or blame, and few traditions said that with more clarity than the Stoics. Chapter 7. The Stoic Case for Silence. Long before screens, feeds, and performance culture, human beings were already trapped by the same weakness: the need to be seen as good, the need to be praised for effort, the fear of judgment, the temptation to arrange virtue as theater. Technology did not invent that weakness, it only industrialized it. That is why the Stoics still matter. They spoke directly to the disease beneath the modern form. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself, not to impress a crowd, but to correct his own mind. That fact alone carries weight. A man with power, status, and the attention of an empire spent his private words reminding himself not to be satisfied with appearing virtuous. He knew the danger. It is possible to speak beautifully about discipline and still remain internally soft. It is possible to play the role of a serious person while avoiding the inner demands of seriousness. The truth is, the Stoics cared far more about lived character than observed character. That is why their voice still cuts through noise. Marcus kept turning back to the same standard. Do the work of a human being, fulfill the function, govern the mind, restrain the ego, stop wandering, stop delaying, stop acting as if being seen doing good is the same as doing it. There is a hard simplicity in that. It leaves no room for performance to hide. It asks not what image you project, but what habits you practice when nobody is present to confirm them. This is where most people stop. They prefer moral theater to moral labor, because theater gets immediate returns. Epictetus pushed the same truth from another angle. He divided life into what is within your control and what is not. Public opinion belongs in the second category. Other people's judgments, interpretations, praise, dismissal, misunderstanding, enthusiasm, none of it truly belongs to you. To build your life around managing those responses is to hand your peace to a force you can never command. That is weakness disguised as social skill. The Stoic answer is not bitterness. It is indifference rooted in clarity. If public opinion is unstable, then it cannot be your standard. If praise can be given cheaply, then it cannot be your nutrition. If judgment changes from day to day, then it cannot govern your choices. That is the case for silence. Not merely that silence protects productivity, though it does. Not merely that silence keeps goals from leaking power, though it does. The deeper case is that silence trains indifference to judgment. It helps detach action from spectators. It teaches you to derive your standard from conduct rather than commentary. That is a competitive advantage in any age. In this age, it is almost unfair because most people are still being pulled around by opinion. They are adjusting tone, ambition, pace, identity, and even values based on what the surrounding environment rewards. They call that adaptability. Often it is dependence. The person who can stay rooted in private standards while the environment shifts has a steadiness others mistake for unusual confidence. It is not magic. It is discipline. It is the refusal to let noise become law. The truth is, indifference to judgment is freedom. Not because you stop caring about truth, because you stop caring about theater. There is a difference. The Stoics never argued for numbness or arrogance. They argued for right relationship. Care about what is yours to govern, your choices, your speech, your effort, your restraint, your reason, your responses. Let those things become excellent, then let the world say what it will. This is where most people stop, because that kind of freedom is costly at first. It requires tolerating misunderstanding. It requires enduring moments where others do not recognize what you are doing. It requires that you continue without emotional payment. It requires humility, because silence often means your identity remains unadvertised. There is no trumpet, no public framing, no manufactured aura. Just conduct. But conduct is what the Stoics trusted, not the claim of discipline, the exercise of it. Not the statement of values, the cost paid to uphold them. Not the pose of strength, the command of impulse under pressure. When you start applying this directly, something changes in the way you move through daily life. You stop feeling the urge to narrate yourself. You stop trying to win every perception battle. You no longer need everyone to understand your choices. The work becomes simpler because the self becomes less divided. There is less image management, less reaction management, less emotional traffic. Silence becomes philosophical strength in action. You keep your standards private until conduct makes them visible. You let effort form identity before language tries to name it. You refuse to trade inner authority for outer approval. That is Stoic silence, not weak silence, not fearful silence. Silent strength, the strength of a person who has realized that speech can be wasteful, opinion can be irrelevant, and a quiet life ordered by discipline can outperform a loud life built on recognition. The truth is, most people want the freedom that only self-command can produce, but they keep feeding the habits that make self-command impossible. They keep speaking too early, sharing too widely, reacting too often, and adjusting too much. The Stoic path calls for something stricter. Govern yourself first. Speak less. Observe more. Build what is real. Leave reputation to the side until reality has earned the right to create it. And once that principle becomes clear, it can no longer remain abstract. It has to enter the structure of the day. It has to become habit, repetition, practice, a discipline of silence, not just in thought, but in the way you live from morning until night. Chapter 8. The Discipline of Daily Silence. Understanding silence changes nothing if the day is still built for noise. A clear principle in the mind can be erased by a disordered morning, a reactive afternoon, and an undisciplined evening. If silence is going to become power, it has to become practice. It has to be woven into routine so deeply that your attention begins returning to itself by habit rather than by luck. The truth is, silence is not a mood. It is a system. This is where most people stop. They admire the idea but never redesign the day around it. The day usually begins with a theft. The phone, the messages, the feed. The outside world enters before your own mind has even stood up properly. Before you have chosen a direction, reaction has already begun. Now your attention is fragmented before it ever belonged fully to you. That is a terrible opening. It teaches the mind that outward noise has first claim on consciousness. A different life starts differently. Wake and remain unreachable for a while. Do not rush to be available. Sit with your own mind before the world places its hands on it. Let the first voice you hear be your own clear thinking. Read something that orders you. Write something that exposes you. Sit in stillness long enough to notice what is restless, what is weak, what is seeking distraction. This morning, silence is not decorative. It establishes command. It tells the nervous system that the day will not be governed from the outside. Then turn to the highest value task before lesser demands have a chance to multiply. Do not discuss it. Do not post around it. Enter it. Give it the cleanest attention of the day. This is where silence becomes a productivity multiplier. Not because silence is mystical, but because it removes friction. No unnecessary updates, no constant checking, no emotional leakage, just contact with the task. Digital silence matters here. Most people underestimate how much mental force is lost, not through major crises, but through constant small openings. A glance becomes 10 minutes. 10 minutes becomes a broken state. A broken state becomes weaker work. Notifications do not merely interrupt time, they interrupt depth. They make the mind available to triviality at all hours. A disciplined person learns to shut doors, no alerts, no random entry points, no permission given to every outside signal. The truth is, what enters your awareness enters your day. Control the entry points, control the state, control the outcome. This is where most people stop, because digital silence can feel socially risky. It can make you seem less immediate, less responsive, less present in the low-level exchange that consumes modern life. But presence is not the same as availability, and constant availability is often a form of self-abandonment. You do not need to answer everything in real time. You do not need to remain permeable to every demand. Delay is not disrespect when delay protects what matters. Social pressure to share is another daily test. Someone asks what you are working on. Someone wants updates. Someone invites you to explain the plan, the next move, the private effort still under construction. This is where disciplined silence becomes skillful speech. You do not need to lie. You do not need to perform mystery. You simply stop oversharing. You answer lightly, briefly, without spilling the center. You learn how to keep the living core of your effort protected. There is strength in not telling everything. There is maturity in not needing to. There is power in letting actions hold information that words do not. A private review practice becomes essential in place of public validation. At the end of the day, sit down and assess. What did you do? Where did you leak attention? When did you seek comfort? When did you remain steady? What deserves correction tomorrow? This private accounting does something profound. It replaces the need for others to witness your effort because you witness it yourself with honesty, not emotionally, precisely. That precision builds trust. You start to learn that self-respect is not built on mood, but on record. You know whether the standard was met. You know whether you ran or remained. You know whether the day was governed by truth or by impulse. That knowledge becomes stronger than praise because it is anchored in fact. This is where most people stop, because honest review is hard. It removes excuses, it reveals patterns, it keeps the mirror clear. But that is exactly why it matters. Silence without self-examination can become avoidance. Silence with examination becomes discipline. And discipline of daily silence also includes restraint in speech beyond goals and plans. It includes not reacting to every provocation, not filling every gap in conversation, not narrating every feeling, not making every internal movement public. Speech costs energy. Unnecessary speech costs more than most people know. The more precise your speech becomes, the more concentrated your mind often becomes. Say less, mean more. Protect the morning, protect the task, protect the mind, review the day, repeat. That is how silence enters the structure of life. Not as a dramatic vow, as a series of controlled choices, small gates held firmly, attention repeatedly returned, noise repeatedly denied authority. Over time, the effect becomes visible. The mind grows less reactive. The work grows more substantial. The self grows less dependent on being seen. And then something remarkable begins to accumulate. Not in a flash, not in a spectacle, quietly, over months, over seasons, over a year of not leaking yourself everywhere. Silence begins to yield a result that public performers almost never achieve. Chapter 9. What silence builds over time. At first, the difference is hard to see. A quiet person and a loud person can look similar for a while. Both may speak about discipline. Both may appear active. Both may have plans, routines, intentions. But time is ruthless. Time exposes whether energy has been spent on signal or substance, and when enough time passes, the gap becomes impossible to hide. The truth is, private consistency compounds, not loudly, not quickly, but with force. Every day you keep your attention gathered, rather than scattered. Something is being built. Every hour spent working instead of performing is adding weight. Every moment you resist the urge to announce, explain, defend, or seek applause, you keep more energy available for actual construction. Small disciplined acts begin stacking. The stack becomes structure. The structure becomes capability. Capability becomes result. This is where most people stop. They underestimate what quiet repetition becomes when protected for long enough. Public performers often live in a cycle of visible starts and invisible collapses. There is always a new declaration, a new reset, a new promise, a new display of intent. But because so much effort is devoted to exposure, the underlying system remains weak. The result is inconsistency with excellent branding. The image stays alive longer than the discipline. Silent builders move differently. They may look unimpressive at first because there is little to see, but while others spend emotional currency on being noticed, silent builders accumulate proof. Skill deepens, savings grow, bodies change, thought sharpens, work stacks, habits root, emotional control increases. A private reputation forms inside the person first, and that private reputation becomes one of the strongest forces in life. Because once you know yourself as someone who follows through in silence, you stop negotiating with weakness so easily. The truth is, the deepest reputation is the reputation you hold with yourself. If you break your word privately, you know. If you keep it privately, you know. And over time that knowledge changes posture, speech, decision-making, and risk tolerance. You become calmer because evidence exists. Not public evidence at first, internal evidence, repeated proof that you can continue without noise. That kind of self-knowledge cannot be faked or borrowed. Then eventually the outer world begins to notice what the inner world has been building all along. This is where the public result appears, not because you announced it, but because it became too real to hide. The work quality rises, the body reflects the standard, the finances show restraint, the skill becomes obvious, the confidence stops asking permission. People start asking what happened. They call the result sudden because they were absent for the quiet part. But nothing real is sudden. Quiet growth only looks sudden to inattentive eyes. Silent discipline only looks effortless to people who never saw the repetition. That is why people who arrive quietly often arrive further. They were not burning energy on maintenance of image. They were not constantly resetting in public. They were not building a personality around ambition. They were letting time and consistency do their hard, patient work. While others sought early acknowledgement, they were letting compound force gather, and compound force is merciless once it matures. A year of silent discipline changes more than outcomes. It changes identity. The version of you that emerges is harder, calmer, less reactive, less needy, and more exact. You stop confusing motion with progress. You stop letting noise decide your mood. You stop telling everyone what you intend to do, because you have learnt that intention is sacred when protected and cheap when displayed. You begin to carry yourself like someone whose center of gravity is internal. This is where most people stop, because they do not think in long enough lines. They want visible proof in days and weeks. Silence asks for longer faith in process, not blind faith, disciplined faith, built through daily evidence. Keep the standard, keep the attention, keep the mouth still, keep the work moving. Time will reveal what noise never could. The reputation that eventually forms around a silent builder is different from the reputation of a performer. It carries seriousness. People sense that you do not speak lightly, They sense that your words arrive with backing. They sense that if you mention a direction, something substantial is already underway. Results and silence together create credibility of a higher order, because the world has been trained to expect talk without follow-through. When it encounters restraint joined to proof, it pays attention. But that attention is no longer your food. It is only a byproduct. That is the mark of maturity. When external recognition arrives and does not become your center again, when results become visible and you still remain governed by the same inward standard that built them, when noise returns and fails to move you. The truth is, silence was never reducing your life. It was concentrating it. It was not making you smaller. It was making you denser. It was not hiding your power. It was preparing it. And eventually, preparation reaches a threshold. There comes a moment when the private work can no longer remain private in its effects. The standard has shaped reality. The effort has taken form. The results speak with a clarity that no explanation ever could. Then the final lesson arrives. Silence was not the destination. It was the method that made the arrival undeniable. Chapter 10. Arrive loudly. There comes a day when the room changes without you saying a word, not because you demanded attention, not because you announced a reinvention, not because you posted your way into importance. The room changes because reality changed. Your work became visible. Your discipline took form. Your choices accumulated until they could no longer be mistaken for intention alone. That is how real arrival happens. Not through speech first, through structure first. The truth is, results carry a different authority than words ever can. Words ask to be accepted. Results force recognition. Words can be doubted, debated, ignored, misread, or dismissed. Results stand there, solid, concrete, unapologetic. They represent every morning you protected, every distraction you cut, every urge to explain that you refused, every lonely hour of unseen repetition, every day you kept building while the world looked elsewhere. This is where most people stop. They want to arrive in language because language is faster than labor. But the loudest arrival is not noise. It is undeniable evidence. Think about what it means to let results speak for everything you chose not to say. It means your body answers where your promises once would have. Your work answers where your branding once would have. Your bank account answers where your plans once would have. Your calm answers where your defensiveness once would have. Your consistency answers where your declarations once would have. Life starts speaking on your behalf because you finally stopped interrupting it with premature words. That is power, not theatrical power, grounded power, the power of a person who builds before speaking, the power of a person who does not need to announce discipline because discipline has become visible in conduct. The power of a person who learned that silence is not passivity, it is stored force, and stored force becomes impact when released through results. There is something almost severe about this kind of arrival. It unsettles people because it bypasses all the usual signals. You did not negotiate for status. You did not ask for permission. You did not keep everyone updated so they could adjust their expectations gradually. You just kept working. Then one day the evidence stood in the room ahead of your explanation. Some people will admire it. Some will resent it. Some will act surprised. Some will say you became distant, private, hard to read. Let them speak. Their interpretation is not the work. Their reaction is not the standard. If silence taught you anything, it taught you this. Other people's timing for understanding you is not your responsibility. The truth is, your silence was never weakness. It was the discipline that made everything possible. It protected the early stage. It preserved the hunger. It built self-command. It separated you from the approval loop. It taught you to work without witnesses. It trained you to let proof matter more than praise. And now the method has done its job. This does not mean you never speak. It means speech has changed rank in your life. It is no longer first. It follows reality. It follows effort. It follows structure. You speak from built ground, not from imagined ground. You speak when there is substance behind the sentence. You let words carry earned weight instead of borrowed energy. This is the final identity shift. You stop seeing yourself as someone who intends and start seeing yourself as someone who executes. You stop measuring seriousness by emotional intensity and start measuring it by repeated behavior. You stop needing the public version of growth because the private version has become too valuable to expose cheaply. This is where most people stop because speaking early feels alive. It feels relieving. It feels social and exciting and full of possibility. Silence can feel harder, colder, less visible, but hard is often the doorway, and the doorway leads somewhere that noise never reaches. A life with stronger foundations, a mind less owned by reaction, a character less dependent on applause, a future shaped by force rather than display. You can choose that life now. You can stop narrating and start building. You can stop leaking power and start storing it. You can stop asking to be seen and start becoming undeniable. The world does not need another person performing discipline. It has plenty of them already. It needs more people whose lives carry the weight of private standards, more people who can endure obscurity while they strengthen, more people who do not speak every intention into weakness, more people who understand that control over attention is a form of power, that silence is a form of control, and that focused inward effort is often the shortest path to extraordinary visible outcomes. So let the next season be quieter. Let the plan remain close. Let the work become intimate again. Let discipline replace display. Let your inner life grow teeth. Let your standards become strict enough that applause feels unnecessary. Then continue, calmly, repeatedly, without drama, without announcement, without asking who is watching. And when the day comes that your results enter the room before your voice does, you will understand something with full force. The silence did not hide you, it built you. Say less and do more. Attention is expensive. Spend it on the work. The mouth can drain what the hands have not yet earned. Silence keeps power from leaking. What you protect in private can grow in strength. Approval is cheap when compared to proof. The world rewards performance quickly and substance slowly. Take the slower reward. Do not explain the seed while it is still beneath the soil. Guard the early stage of every serious thing. Not every plan deserves public air. The deepest standards are kept without witnesses. You do not need to sound disciplined. You need to become difficult to distract. Private effort leaves a mark on the soul. Every unchecked desire for recognition weakens command. The room grows quieter when you stop begging it to notice you. What you repeat in silence becomes identity. You are not here to advertise your future. You are here to build it. Let results carry the weight of your restraint. Let calm become your signature. Let control become your language. What is real does not panic for attention. Silence is not absence. Silence is stored force. When the work is finished, life will speak for you.